Hello, my name is Michael Stevens. I'm the president of the Society for the Preservation of Canada's Nuclear Heritage. We're working to preserve and present the long story of Canada's involvement in nuclear science and technology. Some of that history is told in various small museums, but only part of it. We want to tell the whole story in both a virtual museum and a physical museum. I'd like to thank the professional engineers for this opportunity to present our effort to preserve Canada's past and also setting the stage for the future developments, which I'm sure engineers are going to be contributing for many decades to come. When people think about Canadian nuclear technology, typically the first thing they think about is the CANDU reactor. Pickering's, Bruce, Darlington that produce over half of Ontario's electricity routinely. Well, there's a long history to the development of those machines, and this chart to my right shows that history all the way from the beginning of nuclear energy development in Canada. The very first reactor was ZEEP, Zero Energy Experimental Pile. It didn't produce energy, but it was a pure research reactor used to develop the nuclear physics calculations for the first big research reactor, NRX, National Research Experimental. NRX was the world's most versatile and large-scale research reactor for many decades. And it was followed in 1957 by its sibling, NRU, National Research Universal. That reactor carried on for 60 years, and it was only shut down in 2018. NPD, the first CANDU demonstration reactor, 25 megawatts, was built just up the valley from Chalk River, and it led to the Douglas Point reactor down on the Bruce Peninsula, 220 megawatts. After that, the first multi-unit station, Pickering, was built, 8 reactors, starting in the 1970s, and then that led to 2 streams of reactors, the 700 megawatt class, which included single unit stations at Point Lepreau and Balsay, Gentilly 2, and Chernavoda 1. That reactor type was converted into multi-unit stations at Chernavoda, at Wolsong in Korea, and Xinshan in China. In the 900 megawatt class, there were the Bruce A and Bruce B reactors, now the largest reactor complex in the world, and the Darlington reactors near Toronto. The plans for future development of the CANDU class was the ACR 700. We have a model of that, and who knows how things are going to develop in the future, but that would be a candidate for the next generation of reactors. Right, this is a model of an ACR 700. It was a proposed improvement on the single unit station, the kind used at Point Lepreau. Basically, it was an optimized design. It had a much smaller calandria, and it used slightly enriched uranium and light water coolant, but retained the heavy water moderator and line refueling that CANDUs are famous for. This hasn't been developed yet, but it's still available if we want to pursue it in the future. As you can see in the model, it has quite a dense interior to the calandria, of course, since it is smaller than the existing 700 megawatt class reactors. NPD, or Nuclear Power Demonstration, was the first true CANDU power reactor. It was built about 20 kilometers upriver from Chalk River Laboratories, and it showed a real innovation from the research reactors at Chalk River itself. Those reactors had fuel channels vertically, and in NPD, the original design was going to be a vertical fuel channel design as well. But it was decided later that given difficulties in producing pressure vessels for that style of reactor, it would make much more sense to have the fuel channels horizontal That also made it possible to get into online refueling with fueling machines at either end of each fuel channel. And those were the defining characteristics that CANDU reactors have had ever since. Now in our collection, we've got quite a range of items from NPD. For example, this photo shows the generator for the station. This is a photo from when it was started up in 1962. And you can see the little builder's plates on the generator. Just down on the table here, we've got those two very plates straight off the machine. Of course, we had the fuel bundles that went into the fuel channels. This was the very first design, a later one, a 19 fuel pin bundle. And we've got in our collection the official engineer stamped drawing of that fuel channel. So that's a rarity. But in our collections, not only do we have the straight technical side, it's the human side of the story that we find interesting as well. So for example, I'll hold up this very heavy coffee mug, and you will see that the shell of the mug is made out of calandria tube material, and the base is made out of pressure tube material. And this is typical of the kind of retirement gifts and celebratory items that were made for people along the way. We're interested in collecting that kind of interesting thing too. This is a model of the NRX reactor, the first big experimental reactor in Canada. It has vertical fuel channels, natural uranium in them, moderated by heavy water, as in later CANDUs. But it was cooled by light water running through tubes, coming in from the top down to the bottom and out. It was a straight through cooling cycle to the Ottawa River. Around the outer part of the core was the so-called J-rod annulus, these rods here in the model. And that was where originally plutonium was produced way back when in the Cold War days. Later on, that array of rods was converted over to irradiate cobalt to make cancer therapy sources. Now you notice the fuel channels here are vertical. CANDU reactors these days, they're horizontal. The big change came in the NPD reactor when it was decided for technical reasons it was better to have the fuel rods horizontal. Even though NRX and its sibling NRU could be refueled from on top, it was much easier to fuel from the two ends later on, and that became standard practice. Now, we have many examples of different parts of reactors in our collection. Here's one of my favorites. It's called an NRX loop trip whistle. About a half a dozen of these cooling channels were isolated and then looped into external circuits so that you could run experiments in them at a different temperature and pressure than in the rest of the reactor. These loop trip whistles, one per loop, were air-driven, and they would give an indication if something was amiss and needed tending to. And yes, it actually works. I have pumped air through it and it makes a nice whistle. And each loop had its own distinctive whistle. They were tuned so you could tell which one was which. You also notice that this artifact and all the other ones in our collection has got a QR tag. That's got all the information we've got about the origin, use, interesting facts about the individual artifact. So for our over 450 artifacts now, we have them all cataloged, studied, and labeled. Well, CANDU reactors are a key part of Canadian nuclear history. There are many, many other facets of nuclear technology where Canada has been heavily involved. One of them is accelerators. For example, we've had the Fella and Impella industrial accelerators at Chalk River and the I-1011 electron accelerator out at Whiteshell in Manitoba. One of the most important scientific accelerators we've had in Canada is TASC. TASC stands for Tandem Accelerator Superconducting Cyclotron. It was at Chalk River. It was taken out of service in the mid-1990s, but in its day it was only one of 4 machines in the world capable of doing what it could do. The tandem accelerator part involved taking negatively charged ions, accelerating them up to the midpoint in the tandem accelerator, and then accelerating them again as positively charged particles. Then the beam could be directed through a superconducting cyclotron to accelerate them even more, and then sent off to the experimental area into various experimental rigs. One of the souvenirs we have from TASC is the chart that shows the safety levels. It tells you what's going on in the different parts of the whole system and what areas are safe as regards radiation and which areas aren't. So a choice sample. As well, TASC has inspired artwork. This diagram was done by a relative of one of the primary people involved in the project. The design of the superconducting cyclotron is imposed over the main part of it. And as with all excellent projects that know what's important in life, we have the t-shirt from TASC. Besides scientific research and industrial applications, accelerators can produce some rather beautiful artwork. This figure in the lucite block you're seeing is called a Lichtenberg figure. It was produced with the electron accelerator at Woodshell Laboratories. Basically, the lucite is irradiated in the accelerator and then tapped with a sharp object at one end outside, and the stresses induced in the lucite block by the irradiation are then released, and you get this wave-like pattern throughout the lucite. Illuminate it and you've got a unique piece of art. Some of the objects in our collection are actually retirement gifts, which are interesting, of course, for nostalgia value, but sometimes as well, they're actually very interesting technologically speaking. This is a table lamp given to Alan Lane on his retirement. He was heavily involved in the development of the CanFlex Advanced Fuel Bundle. So his retirement gift was a half of a fuel bundle inside a pressure tube, inside a calandria tube, separated by a garter spring. Very nice reminder for him of his career, but also that could be used to explain the insides of a CANDU reactor. The stream of research reactors in Canada didn't end with the NRU reactor. There was also the slowpoke reactor. It was a small, ultra-safe reactor that was quite suitable for use in universities. We have got in our collection the console from the slowpoke reactor out at the University of Alberta in Calgary. They sent it to us. As far as we know, it's still in working order, and some days if we can get a reduced scale model of a slowpoke, we'll try and hook it up and have an actual working model. Besides collecting information on directly nuclear technology, we're interested in all the related things. For example, the little brown calculator in the middle there, it's called a Frieden calculator. We picked it up for $1 in a garage sale in Deep River. Well, so what? Well, it's a predecessor, of course, of the electronic computers we use today. It's all electromechanical. The innards are just amazing. And on the side of this case, on this one, it says property of U.S. Navy. Now, why on earth would a U.S. Navy calculator end up here? Well, we did do tests in the NRX reactor for the U.S. Navy to develop the fuel that went into American military vessels, submarines, aircraft carriers, etc. And in fact, that approach to reactor design ended up in the American PWR reactors that they used down south. So there's a direct connection to the United States. Off to the right, this impressive looking module with the big blue background is the Datatron computer. It was the first electronic computer used at Chalk River Labs. It was based on vacuum tubes, not transistors. This was back in the 1950s. And it had all the data storage anyone could hope for. On the right of the display, on the side, is one of these storage modules. And this impressive array of tubes and resistors and such was capable of storing 1 whole byte. And the computer had about 155 of them. Glorious storage capacity. ZEEP, the Zero Energy Experimental Pile, the first Canadian reactor and the first reactor to go critical outside the United States. ZEEP went critical on September 5th, 1945, and last year the Society put out a commemorative stamp to celebrate the 75th anniversary of that. Those stamps are still available, by the way. And you can see just down below the stamp, there's a model of a ZEEP reactor. It's actually one of our many retirement gifts. It was given to Ralph Green upon his retirement. Down on the right of our display, which we've used at various exhibits, you can see 3 big gray blocks. Those are 3 of the actual graphite blocks used to build ZEEP. And they're still available. If you want to come over and heft one, good luck. They weigh about 100 pounds each. It's amazing how dense they are. In the middle of the little display of the 3 blocks, you'll see a little sign. It says, original heavy water gauge used in September 1945. And the text reads, on September 5th, 1945, when the heavy water reached to within a few millimeters of the predicted height, Dr. Lou Kowarski announced critical, and everyone clapped. The height was 132.6 centimeters. Unfortunately, we only have this label. The actual heavy water gauge has disappeared. And if any of you know where it is, we'd be delighted to have a chat. Besides our large collection of artifacts, and I've shown you a few examples, but there are many more, we also have a large collection of books limited to nuclear technology, mathematics and science and related topics. All of these books have been labeled, cataloged, indexed up to international library standards so that they're available to anyone interested in doing research on various topics in the nuclear area. One of the key people in Canadian nuclear history was Wilford Bennett Lewis, W.B. Lewis, who led the work at Chalk River for many years. We have many of his personal belongings and souvenirs. For example, the Enrico Fermi Award he received from Ronald Reagan, President of the United States. W.B. Lewis's personal dosimeter badge from Chalk River. He had badge number 11 if you're interested. His camera, he was an amateur photographer, and the radio. In World War II, he was involved in British radar research. And this is the radio he had here after the war. And he was the kind of guy who was unhappy with one of the 6 bands on the radio, complained to the manufacturer. They told him what was wrong, and he took a radio apart and fixed it himself. So quite the person, and just one of many people that we've got interesting stories to tell about. Well, there's a brief introduction to the Society and what we're working towards. If you are interested in knowing more, you can go to our website, nuclearheritage.com. If you'd like to join us, there's a membership application there. If you have anything you think might be of interest to keep it in our National Museum to be, please let us know. And there's our story in a nutshell. I think it's time to say goodbye. I'd just like to take this opportunity again to thank PEO for giving us an opportunity to spread our message to a broader audience. Bye for now.